Yep, not.
Okay, hello there. Hopefully we're now live. So hello everyone and welcome to Convex Live. We are talking about a very interesting topic today, which is actually the reason that we are here. So why are we doing what we're doing at the Convex Foundation and in the Convex ecosystem? We're going to be talking about the Convex Manifesto, which was something we put together the first time a year or two back, when we wanted to just really lay out the principles of what we're doing at Convex. But it is an open source document. It's a living document. So as well as sort of sharing what's currently in the manifesto and talking about some of the ideas within it, it's also a chance to think about ways we can improve it, and what else do we want to say, and how do we actually make the manifesto better. And that's something which is definitely open for everyone in the community. It's on GitHub. It's all open source. So suggestions for improvements are very much welcome. I see it as a kind of living document. So with me on the call today, I have Rich. Hi, Rich.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, very good today. Sun's shining. It's beautiful out here today.
Excellent.
One of the things about the manifesto I thought was interesting is that you originally came up with some really good sections. Maybe it'd be good to outline first what all the sections are in the manifesto so people have an idea of what it all covers.
Yeah, sure. We can definitely do that. So I've just switched over to the manifesto itself. So this is the view on the sort of the GitHub pages. This is the prettified version. There is the GitHub version if you want to go and edit the original source. But I'll talk through some of the sections and some of the sort of the concepts. So these are the things that are sort of on the side. So we're talking about open economic systems. How do we build better decentralized systems that everyone can participate on a level playing field on a fair basis? We're talking about self-sovereignty, the idea of people being in charge of their own destiny. We're talking about sustainability, both from a network sense but also from an ecological sense. We're talking about fair access, everyone having an equal right to access the facilities that the network offers. We're talking about some of the things that we want to achieve, which are more like the features and goals of the Convex as a system. So having this ability for real-time transactions, having the global state, which is very important for a number of reasons, which we'll discuss. And also the data lattice. So how do we really scale this for big data, for all the different kinds of data in the world at global scale? How we make it programmable, how we make it transparent, how do we make it cost effective, how do we enable digital asset innovation. So all of these are very important points. So can I scroll this a bit? One sec. Yeah, so let's get this size right. So we're talking about open architecture and open source. So this is more about how we build Convex and the principles by which we operate. The concept of network neutrality. So how do we make a network that is neutral and doesn't discriminate between different users and use cases? The freedom to participate in network operations. So this is about the decentralization of operations of the network. The Convex coin, so what is the native currency we use on the network. Community recognition, how we're recognizing and rewarding people in the community. And finally, and possibly most importantly, governance. How do we make sure that the network is actually governed in the common interests? And of course, governance should be aligned with what our principles and our sort of goals are within the manifesto. So those are some of the sort of themes that the manifesto covers, and we'll go through in a bit more detail and cover the specific points. But Rich, is there anything you wanted to say about the structure or the sort of the contents of the manifesto at a high level?
Yeah, I thought it was really thoughtful and highlights some very key points that are necessary in a system like this. It starts with open economic systems. So I was wondering if you would be able to elaborate
Yeah.
how Convex facilitates these win-win scenarios in open economic systems.
Sure. I mean,
And maybe a real-world example.
yeah, let me zoom in on the section and what it says. I mean, it's a good topic to start with. Um, there is a little preamble as well, which you know, I can just quickly read through if that's useful, Rich, before I
Yeah,
go
I
into
think
your
that'd be
question.
useful. Yeah.
So we are building open economic systems based on decentralized technology. We say for the 21st century and beyond. This is new technology. It's for the future of the digital economy and economic systems of the future that hopefully offer better properties than current systems. We make the point that the time is right for change. You know, societies are burdened with, let's say, inefficient economic systems and quite often unfair economic systems that, you know, really put a lot of people at a disadvantage. And this is linked to the fact that these centralized organizations hold massive power, whether that's the big tech companies or whether that's governments or whether that's sort of gatekeepers who can control access to certain resources, you know, for example, in the financial sector. And, you know, all of these hold back the ability of people to really, you know, access the economy freely. We make the point that transaction costs are huge. This is a really big issue. I mean, probably, you know, certainly my estimate is 5 to 10% of the entire world GDP is absorbed in transaction costs. You know, once you count the different levels of transactions, once you count the overheads of, you know, accounting and collecting money and all of the other, you know, incidental costs of transactions that don't actually relate to delivering value, i.e. the goods and services that people actually want. All of that is, you know, is effectively waste. Yeah, so we want to minimise that as much as possible. We want to make sure that people are able to participate fairly. You know, they're not excluded from the financial system, and of course we want it to be sustainable. We don't want this system to be doing even more damage to the planet, to the you know, ecological systems, and making sure that we live in a sustainable basis. So we're trying to build a system that really supports a fair, efficient, and sustainable economy in the future. We also make the point that, look, AI is changing things massively. AI is probably the biggest change in our economy, certainly since the internet, and quite possibly ever, depending on how it develops and how it rolls out. And you know, certainly my belief is that it's critical that we make sure in this sort of age of transformation that individuals have power over their own data and their own rights and their own ability to participate in the economy. Otherwise, it could very easily get taken away. And Convex is really trying to provide the decentralized system that helps to solve some of these problems. So it's real-time, peer-to-peer exchange of data and value. Yeah. So we're talking about how do you share information, how do you manage information, and how do you do value exchange, where people are sort of trading value with each other in various different ways. And that's what we want to see in the world. We want to see this kind of decentralized economy really achieve mass adoption and really be in a strong position to you know, support the needs of the world. So, and then finally, this manifesto outlines our beliefs and core principles. So it's a statement of, you know, what we believe, and you know, we can always articulate things in better ways. So it is a living document, and we will be trying to improve it. But I think we will always stay true to the overall spirit of what's in the manifesto now. I don't think any of this is going to radically change in sentiment. Yeah, it might change in wording, or it might change in some of the minor details, but you know, in overall principles, I think we're pretty clear on the kind of things that we want to see and why we're doing it. Does that make sense?
I could imagine that as quantum starts taking a bigger role, we might want to make some adjustments, but I mean, I think the principles would stay the same, right?
Yeah, and the manifesto doesn't say very much about implementation. Yeah, so if at some point in the future quantum technology means that, you know, cryptography has to change, then we can change the cryptography without having to change the manifesto. We're still trying to achieve the same thing. We're just maybe having to use some more sophisticated tools to do it. But absolutely, yeah, stuff will evolve, stuff will change, and we will be, in enhancing the technology. And hopefully, as we enhance the technology, of course, we're staying in line with the manifesto. Manifesto does not need to specify technical details. Yeah, we have the convex architecture documents, the CADs, which go into much more of the technical details and the sort of protocol specifications and these things. So this is more to sort of a higher level, and while it does reference some technical points, it's more or less technology independent. Yeah, so it's independent of the exact mechanisms we use to achieve these things.
Can you give like a real world example of where the win-win principle could help transform economic interactions?
Yeah, so the open economic systems is sort of the first point in the manifesto. Key purpose is to facilitate open economic systems where we say participants freely and mutually create value for each other. I mean, this is going back to the original ideas that economics is founded on. Yeah, the idea of barter, for example. You know, I've grown some carrots, and you're a shepherd, and you've got some wool, and I want some wool, and I give you carrots. Yeah, you've presumably got a lot of wool if you're a shepherd. You don't really need any more, and I've possibly got a lot of carrots if I'm a farmer. So I don't really want any more carrots. But maybe you're hungry and maybe I'm cold. So we have a win-win opportunity by exchanging those goods for each other. And the beautiful thing about voluntary value exchange is that it's a win-win. Yeah, as long as you agree that you want carrots and I agree that I want wool, and and we do a fair trade. Yeah, no one gets cheated. Let's assume no one gets cheated and stuff, but let's assume that the trade is fairly executed. We both won. Yeah, we both given away something that was of less value to us and got something of more value to us, and that's a win-win. Yeah, so the participants are better off. Yeah, and nobody else in the world is made worse off. Yeah, and that's a very important point. Yeah, because no one else was involved in the exchange. Yeah, so they're not affected by it in any way. So when we say voluntary value exchange, we mean that all the people who participate in that value exchange have to agree to it. Yeah, and
there is no third party, is there?
In this case, there's no third party. Yeah. Now, an example of let's say involuntary value exchange would be something like pollution. Yeah. So let's say I decide that I bought some wool from you, but I'm going to use this wool to make some clothes, and in the process of making clothes, I dump some chemicals in the river. Yeah, and those chemicals maybe poison the river downstream and make a bunch of people ill. Yeah, they weren't participants in the value exchange. They didn't consent to being polluted and to getting sick. Yeah. So they've lost. Maybe I've won. Maybe I've made some profit from the clothes. But that wasn't a voluntary value exchange. That was me imposing an external cost on someone else. So I'm the bad guy in this situation. I've harmed someone in the process. So that's an example where it's involuntary. Yeah, you've caused an involuntary harm to another person or another community or indeed the planet, the ecosystem. Yeah, so you can only assume it's a win-win if there aren't any, what economists would call externalities, yeah, which are external costs which are being imposed on unwilling participants. Now, maybe the community downstream actually wants the clothes, yeah, and wants to trade with me and buy some clothes, and they say, okay, for getting some clothes, we'll accept a bit of pollution, and we know not to drink from the river on Tuesdays or whenever it is I'm doing my production. So it might be that it becomes voluntary, yeah, if you broaden the set of participants. But in the case where it is involuntary, then it's not necessarily a win-win. But any voluntary value exchange where the participants are knowingly entering a transaction and executing it fairly is kind of a win-win by definition. Yeah, both parties must have freely chosen to do it, therefore they must believe it's worth more to have done the transaction than not to have done it. Again, if
Right.
it's coercion or something like that, then again it's not voluntary. Yeah, if you force someone to do something, then that's not necessarily a win from a win for them. But what we want to enable is voluntary value exchange. Yeah, and
Right.
there are other mechanisms to stop people from being harmed by involuntary effects. Whether it's regulations or courts or criminal justice system or these kind of things. So there's other mechanisms to ensure that people don't suffer from value exchange in a negative way.
Yeah, and in the next couple parts of this, you talk about sustainability and self-sovereignty, and assuming that somebody owns that land that the river is going down, there's some legal and societal obligations there. How does Convex ensure us as participants can maintain our self-sovereignty and still adhere to the legal and societal obligations?
Yeah, okay, this is a good question. So it brings us on to the next section nicely, self-sovereignty. So participants must be empowered to act as self-sovereign agents. They must be able to transact freely on their own behalf. So there's two sides to this. I mean, firstly, I think it's a fundamental right that people ought to be able to, make a living. That's what this is about. Yeah, being able to, transact on a win-win basis, and a win-win basis could involve earning a living. Yeah, money and all the things you need in life. So, and the idea that people should be able to do that on their own basis, under their own control and under their free will is critical. So that's the key idea with self-sovereignty. And you can always act on your own behalf without having to ask anyone else for permission, or without being forced to use someone else's services. Yeah, that's the fundamental principle here. Because if you've got some, like a wool cartel saying you can't sell wool unless you pay as a cut, yeah, then you're potentially being excluded if you don't stay on the right side of the wool cartel. Yeah, and this is how monopolistic organisations, whether legal or illegal, expropriate value from people. So we want to give the power into people's own hands to act on their own behalf. Now, I think one problem Convex doesn't solve is we can't stop people from doing something that harms other people. Yeah, Convex isn't going to stop that. Yeah, if you want to steal something, you can steal something, and Convex isn't going to solve every problem in the world, sadly. We have to accept that we can't solve every problem, and there's a place for other systems and institutions to help solve that. Now, there might be some ways that you could tokenize pollution rights. You could put externalities into smart contracts, or accounting for externalities into smart contracts. So there are ways that you can help to solve some of those external problems, but it's not at the core of what Convex delivers to solve those. We just note that, look, you've got a responsibility. Yeah. We say in the manifesto, it's important to note that self-sovereignty does not negate the obligation for participants to act within the law and fulfill societal obligations, such as paying appropriate taxes or avoiding harm to other parties, which kind of covers off what I was saying earlier about involuntary value exchange and about negative externalities. So there's this philosophical principle called the Golden Rule, which is stated in many different ways. Some say you do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. Other ways of stating it can be like, do no harm, these kind of things. So, we empower people to act in a self-sovereign manner, but they should still comply with the golden rule. Yeah, so that's a societal obligation and a moral obligation, I think, rather than something that you can enforce through a digital system. But hopefully we're well aligned with that, and well aligned with going in that direction.
Yeah, that sustainability. When you were talking about the river being polluted, is an interesting. How could some people agree to pollute the river when it's a shared resource? Everybody on Earth is going to be impacted under that, and then some people draw a line and say, "Well, this is my land."
Yeah, well, I don't want to go into all the debates on, property rights, and then you get into libertarian arguments, and you get into lots of complexity, and these are, economic philosophers argue about this kind of stuff all the time. I mean, there are good solutions, is what I will say, and they mostly involve some form of systems that regulate behaviour. That's not necessarily government regulations, but
that's why the question really is about. That's really why the question is about how does Convex balance the need of the economic growth with the sustainability of the ecosystem, especially given the way that traditional finance systems work.
So Convex can support the kinds of systems that do that. Yeah. Convex can't enforce real world laws. It's not a government. It doesn't have physical power over the environment. Yeah. So Convex can only assist people in doing this in terms of rights management and in terms of managing externalities. But it's well designed to assist in the right ways. Yeah. So if you were doing externality taxes, then Convex is a great system for helping to organise and manage those. The enforcement of that would have to be outside the scope of Convex, but we can help facilitate it, I would say.
Right.
Where we talk
basically
about
people can build. Basically, then people can build systems and tools on top of Convex that can help with these things. Is that the case?
Well, yes, they could build the tools, but then they also have to put those tools into practice in the real world. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you have a system for carbon credits, for example, you can track the carbon credits as well as you like, but if you're not actually checking in the real world how much carbon is getting emitted, yeah, then what the credits say on a digital ledger is somewhat meaningless. Yeah. So there still needs to be real world enforcement systems and institutions or regulations that make sure that actually gets implemented in the real world. Yeah. So that's where I think I draw the line between what Convex can do, which is to facilitate such systems, and the fact that you still are going to need a real world approach to actually make it happen. Yeah. And I think those two can be designed to work together well, but we don't provide the full solution to all of these things. What I will say is, and when I talk about sustainability of Convex, I am mostly talking about what we're trying to do is to bring the transaction costs and the infrastructure costs of the economy down. Yeah? So every bit of resource that you spend running, the banking system, for example, 5-10% of GDP running the banking system, accounting, accounts payable, all of the transaction costs that relate to the global economy. If we bring those down, then we are reducing ecological footprint. Yeah, we are reducing the waste in the system, and that means that there's more resources that are either being put to better use or ecological footprints being minimized. Yeah. So by reducing transaction costs is the fundamental imperative here. We have to bring transactions costs down if we want our economy to be sustainable, and we don't want to waste resources. I mean, if you've got constrained resources and you don't want to waste resources, then you need to think about, well, how do we get rid of these transaction costs? And Convex really does focus on making those transaction costs as small as possible. And
then didn't you guys do a program with the EU on sustainability, and came out with a pretty interesting statistic on how much in this regard?
yeah, I mean, the energy consumption of Convex is crazily low. So if you look at the total energy cost per transaction on Convex, it's down to microwatt hours. Yeah, it is tiny. Yeah, I think it's as low as you can get, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, if you think about, well, what do you really need to use in terms of energy to validate a digital transaction? Well, you need a bit of compute, you need a bit of network resource, and you need replication. Yeah, so you need peers that replicate that and keep it robust and available and consistently available, so that you can process effectively without falling down. But apart from that, there's really nothing else you need. Yeah, so it's really about making the infrastructure.
I know there were some statistics around that.
Yeah, I mean, because it's kind of a bit hard to calculate because the cost per transaction in energy is, well, you've got the energy of the transaction itself, which is really, really tiny. Yeah, but then you've got certain amount of embedded energy costs in the data centers, in the servers, the manufacture of the servers. Once you go back through the supply chain, there's more energy costs to consider. But even considering all of that, and even taking the worst case, it's still the entire Convex network is going to be using less computing resources than probably any bank. Yeah, we won't be using that many servers. We won't be using that much compute. We won't be using, even if we're running, global scale volumes of transactions. The network will be smaller than the bank infrastructure of any bank or any medium, large size bank. So, just on technology costs alone, it's going to be cheaper. Yeah, or the fundamental infrastructure costs are going to be cheaper. And then once you count, once this network is running, you don't need 10,000 employees managing these systems. Yeah, so all the costs of running offices, commuting, all of the other costs involved in running financial infrastructure, they go away. Yeah, you're literally just paying for some servers running open source protocol, and it needs very little management. Yeah, we've had the Convex testnet, I think, has over 2 years of uptime at some point with virtually no human intervention. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that we're peer operators. Yeah, they'll have to do some upgrades and maintenance at times, but it should be more or less fully automatic. Yeah, so you're not going to need big armies of people managing these systems, fixing problems, checking things when they go down. So you are providing sustainability and reduction of transaction costs in part is by removing all the need for all of that. Yeah, so value exchange on Convex, will be the most efficient way and the most sustainable way of exchanging value, almost certainly in the world. Yeah, I think there's nothing else that could come particularly close to it at the present time. I mean, even other decentralized networks use a lot more infrastructure, use a lot more energy in the processing than Convex. It is such a simple and lean algorithm that it's more or less, I think, optimal for a global transaction system. So yeah,
That's
so
awesome. And we don't use proof of work, so you don't have those energy costs,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So we talk a little bit about proof of work in that, but we don't do anything that wastes energy or
Right.
wastes computational resources. Yeah, everything
Yeah.
that Appear on Convex is doing is useful work. Yeah, it's either validating something from a security perspective, or it's processing something that a user wanted to happen, or it's doing backup, or it's doing storage. It's managing data that needs to be managed. Yeah, nothing's wasted. Yeah, and
Yeah.
we've put a lot of work over the past few years, including with our project with the EU, really getting the efficiency as good as possible. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. And certainly, this is orders of magnitude more efficient than most blockchain-based systems, and orders of magnitude more efficient than centralized financial systems, because they have all the other costs, that dwarf the costs of the Convex network infrastructure. So
You, you
I
know, Mike, when you were designing this, I know you were passionate about fair access economically for the whole world. Can you speak a little bit about that? I think it's in the manifesto there. Um, what kind of measures have we put in place to make sure that everyone, regardless of their social economic background, has a fair access and equal access
Yeah,
to the
so I mean,
network?
this is an important point. I think you know economies thrive when everyone can participate. Yeah, and if there's barriers to entry, if some people can't trade, if people can't access the resources of the economy, then you're missing out on win-win opportunities. Yeah, from their contribution, and also the value that they can get from participating. So if you want to maximize the number of win-wins that happen in the world, everyone's got to be able to play. And you can't have a situation where you've got gatekeepers, extracting a toll every time someone wants to participate, or stopping some people from participating entirely. So that's what we're talking about when we say fair access. Everyone's got to be able to participate on a level playing field. And it's very closely related to the idea of self-sovereignty, like you being in power over your own transactions, your own assets, your own data. This is more about, let's say, a lack of censorship or a lack of gatekeepers. Yeah, you don't have to ask anyone permission to do something on Convex. Yeah, you can do it on your own basis, on a self-sovereign basis, and no one charges a toll for you to use Convex. Yeah, it's a public, open, permissionless network, and this is in common with many other decentralized networks. This idea of self-sovereignty and the idea of being able to have open access. But I think it's an important point, and that's why we sort of re-emphasize it in the manifesto here.
The next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things are like real-time transactions, global state, programmability, transparency, and cost effectiveness. How are these design decisions important, like low latency and stuff? How do they benefit users?
Yeah, sure. So real-time transactions is, I think, a very important part of the vision. And it's important for a number of reasons. And obviously everyone likes fast. Yeah, so fast is good. Yeah, all other things being equal. I think it's important for mass adoption. Yeah, if you want people to really embrace decentralized systems, they've got to be real time. They've got to feel responsive. They've got to be as fast as doing something with your bank, or preferably even faster. Yeah, you've got to be able to match the performance of centralized systems, which means that more or less you've got to get to real time sort of levels. And I think for these decentralized systems to really gain mass adoption, which they haven't really yet, real time is critical, and that's why it's got this important place in the manifesto, because it's something we have to achieve if we're going to get these technologies to a level of mass adoption. Now, it's also important for when you think about processes like payments. Yeah, if you're being paid for something, you want to know you've actually been paid. You don't want to be in a situation where the payment hasn't gone through and you've handed over the goods and then you find out later that the check bounced. Yeah, so real-time confirmations of transactions are very important for facilitating real-world processes, payments, settlement, all of these kind of things in a way that's actually useful for people and stops them from getting scammed and stops them from getting other kinds of hiccups in the win-win value exchange that they're trying to do. Transactions need to be atomic. Yeah, and this is probably one of the more technical points in the manifesto. But if you want something to happen at some digital value exchange, and I'm talking digital primarily here, and there's multiple parties or multiple parts of a transaction that need to happen. Yeah, so you want to buy some IP right from me, and I transfer the IP ownership certificate to you. Well, those two transfers need to happen within a single transaction in order for us both to have a guarantee that we're not going to get stuck with us having done our part and the other person not doing their part. So atomic transaction means either everything happens and it all switches at the same time, or none of it happens, it gets rolled back. And this is kind of like, we discovered this in databases back in the 50s, 60s and 70s. Transactions need to be atomic. Yeah, you've got the ACID. Yeah, the ACID guarantees on databases, if anyone still uses those. But it was atomicity was the first. The A in ACID is about being atomic. C, consistency. I is isolation, and D is durability. Did it actually get persisted and remembered? Yeah. But this atomicity is very important, and what we want is for real-time transactions to be atomic. Yeah, we don't want some kind of roll-up which is going to go and confirm the things 3 hours later. We want that actually to be confirmed in real time. Yeah, and that's what's going to enable us to really unlock the value of decentralized applications for the vast majority of use cases. So we mentioned some possible use cases in here, like mobile payments, gaming, these kind of things where you do need these sort of interactive experiences for consumers. Real time is less important if you're doing some big contract and it's got to get signed, but it doesn't really matter when it gets signed as long as it's in the next week. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Right.
But if it's something that's for mass adoption, for consumer usage, it's absolutely critical. It sort of leads on to the next point. Where are these transactions? Where are these atomic real-time transactions happening? They're happening in the global state. So we believe in a global state model that all users should be able to interact with in as we've already said, a self-sovereign, fair way. And why do we need a global state? We need the global state because there are some things where you need this single source of truth. Yeah, whether that's whether it's to do with economic value exchange of digital assets is the canonical example, where you need to know if you received your tokens or not. Yeah, and the global state is a place where you can record such things and you can validate that, and because everyone agrees on the global state, then everyone agrees, yes, you own those tokens, and they feel good to let you then spend those tokens or accept those tokens for other uses. You need a consistent global state for that to be useful. And there are other things that also need a consistent global state. And a good example, and I'm going to refer to something from the classic infrastructure. We have the domain name system. Yeah, So, you know,
Right.
google.com, all the domain names that are used on the internet. Now, that actually highlights a problem in the design of the internet, in my view, that it needs this global state, but that global state, while it's redundant, while it's shared around, you know, there's lots of servers around the world managing domain names and stuff like that, it's still quite a centralized system, and it still lies on some sort of central authorities to sign keys and manage DNS security and stuff like that. It is in some ways quite centralized, and that creates attack vectors. Yeah, ways that people can you know, change how, you know, DNS hijack attacks and stuff like that.
Right.
So having a global state for things that need to be publicly known and trusted is very, very important. Yeah, and the internet works around it with DNS in lots of clever ways, but it's still, I think, a bit of a suboptimal solution. So if you wanted to build something like DNS on Convex, that's actually easy, because you've got the global state, and the global state is already this shared, verifiable public database, if you like. And for these sort of public roots of trust, it's a great facility to have. And there's other things like digital identity. Yeah, so anything to do with identity, where you want to publicly say, look, this is me, these are my public keys. Obviously, you're not going to be sharing your private keys. Then you can do that with a global state, and everyone can see it, everyone can validate it, and everyone check, yeah, that actually is Mike. Yeah, that's actually his key, and that's actually his signature. So the global state is important to the convex model. It's also practical in the sense that, I mean, some decentralized systems have many different shards, or many different isolated islands of state, which is fine for some use cases, but then you've got the problem of how do you ensure consistency across all of these, and how do you make sure that one shard can access data in another shard, etc., etc. And from an architectural perspective and a security perspective, that's a really hard problem. Yeah, synchronizing and coordinating between different sharded pieces of state is difficult. So from an architectural perspective, we also want to be able to offer users and application builders a single global state that they can rely on. And that simplifies things. It makes it easier to build applications if you can rely on this.
That kind of talks about programmability then too, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. So I mean, programmability
Makes it easier to program something, right?
Yeah, it's a bit out of order. Actually, it's messed up the order of these things. Some of these aren't appearing in the same order that.
Oh,
No, that was you, Rich. You skipped one. You skipped data lattice. But yes, it does touch on programmability. So the idea that you can have programmable actors that execute well-defined rules on your behalf. So smart contracts and other such systems. That needs to exist, and it needs to be able to exist and work within the global state. Yeah, so you can have a smart contract that determines who has, for example, let's say you've got a digital identity. It can determine who has the right to update metadata on your digital identity, for example. That could be a smart contract or an actor that's adding some access control rules. So we need to have it programmable so that people can create the rules that make sense for their application, for their use case, or for the economic contracts that they want to represent with smart contract. So programmability is all about that. We need to have the ability for the Convex virtual machine to be able to execute pretty much whatever users want to define as the rules of their smart contracts. And that's fundamentally integrated with the global state, because, you know, when transactions happen, it may execute a smart contract, and that smart contract may result in some change to the global state. So the two kind of have to work together in unison.
what is it that you wanted to say about the data lattice?
So data, yeah. So this is an important part of the story. So while we've talked about the global state and we've talked about the convex virtual machine and how that's the sort of the global source of truth, most data should not be there. Yeah. And the vast majority of the data in the world does not need to be encoded in smart contracts. Yeah, if you think about, media files, if you think about data sets being used to train massive AI models, this doesn't need to be on a decentralized public global state. Yeah, it might be decentralized, but it's going to be decentralized by lots of individual people holding their own data. It's more like a federation. And that might be replicated by some parties, or it might be kept, pretty private or controlled. So there's many different ways that you might want to store data and distribute that among a decentralized network. And what the data lattice does is it uses some of the same design principles and ideas of Convex, but to create this sort of infinitely scalable network of data systems that can manage any kind of data, and whether that's streaming media, whether that's AI data sets, whether it's big data, all of these kind of things. We want to have a solution that enables all of these things to be able to interoperate again on a peer-to-peer, self-sovereign, decentralized basis. So you choose how your data gets shared, you choose who can have access. You choose if you want someone else to back up your data for you. The data lattice really supports all of these use cases. So, I mean, if going into some of the points, we say it is 100% peer-to-peer. There is absolutely no centralized thing in the data lattice. You don't even need the global state to use the data lattice. Yeah. If you want to use the global state alongside the data lattice, then they're compatible and they work very nicely together. So you might want, for example, the global state to record hashes to say, okay, this is the hash of my data, and if you want to verify it and its integrity and its provenance, then you can validate it against this hash. And you might want to put that hash on the global state, but you wouldn't want to put the data itself on the global state. And the data lattice is 100% peer-to-peer. It's just the nodes that decide they want to share data, and the nodes that decide they want to acquire and consume data, all working together in a decentralized network. And
so, since it'll handle vast amounts of off-chain data efficiently, what are the benefits, or can you give some examples of the structural benefits for developers specifically, and perhaps end users of decentralized applications?
Yeah, I mean, so for example, one of the things that we're actually having a lot of fun building at the moment, because it's actually very elegant, is the data lattice file system. So this is a file system running on top of the data lattice that kind of looks and feels a bit like Dropbox. Yeah, you've got files, you've got directories, you can put any data you want in there, and it's like Dropbox, but you don't have to pay anyone. You run it yourself. Yeah, you run it yourself on your laptop, on your PC, and you can replicate between them, and perfect replication. It resolves any conflicts, any changes automatically, and synchronizes drives. But it's 100% peer-to-peer. There's no centralized server. Yeah, and if you wanted to give a backup to someone else so they can keep a backup of your drive, then you can do that. But that's fully opt-in. Yeah, if you want to, you can just keep replicas among your own systems. And this is actually a really nice way of managing data. Yeah, you don't have to rely on any centralized service to manage your own data. So imagine if you're like a bunch of researchers doing AI models, and you've got some big data sets, and you've got some models, and you want to be able to share those, and you want to do that efficiently, and you don't want to be paying some vast amounts for the world's largest Google Drive. Then the DLFS is the tool for you. That's just one example of what you can do with the data lattice, but it's very efficient. because the data is designed to work as a lattice, and I doubt I'll have time to go into all the mathematical details, but the lattice effectively enables you to replicate data in a peer-to-peer manner extremely efficiently, and that makes many things super efficient and elegant for people building applications and for users of applications. So we'll no doubt cover developments in this in sort of future calls, but it's very exciting. I sometimes describe it as BitTorrent meets Dropbox meets IPFS, because it combines the best of all of those things.
Yeah, that's gonna be a fun innovation. In here, you're talking about transparency and cost effectiveness, and then innovation in digital assets. How is the transparency respecting also privacy of users? And you've already talked about how cost effective it is, and maybe you can highlight the innovations in digital assets.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different questions there. So first of all, yeah, so I mean, we do actually say in the manifesto there is a trade-off between transparency and privacy. Yeah, and it's important to get the balance right. And there are some things that you want to be public. Yeah, you want your DNS records to be public so people can find you. Yeah, it's like in your address book. Yeah, but you're going to want to keep some stuff private. Probably your health records. You maybe don't want to be shared over the whole internet. So we support letting people choose their own dividing line. Yeah, and again, it's back to self-sovereignty. If you want to make data public, you can. Yeah, if you want to keep the data private, you also can. So the thing that really needs to be transparent is the operation of the economic systems. So the stuff that happens on the global state, where people transfer tokens, that should be transparent. Yeah, you don't want dodgy deals going on. You don't want money laundering. You don't want fraud happening, and transparency helps to shine a light and eliminate that. So we do think that the operation of the economic system aspects should be transparent to all participants. But your own private data, you're not going to make public. Yeah, and that should be a choice that individual users have. So so question from the chat is DLFS a federation? It kind of touches on this point. Yeah, DLFS can be a federation if you decide you want to share your data with some federation, some sets of participants. It can also be completely private. So again, we're about giving people the self-sovereign choice of how much data they want to share and how much they want to be transparent about. And DLFS is a good example of that. Yeah, that's an example of something that by default is just private to you, but if you want to share it with the world, you can. Yeah. So that's transparency. Any other? Did that answer your question on that, Rich?
Yep. Interested in what the next 4 things: digital assets, the open architecture,
see if I can
open
get through
source.
them quickly, because you've only got about 6 minutes left. Time flies, when you talk about these topics.
Yeah.
So cost effectiveness. I mean, I think we say transaction costs should be negligible, and we say they should be fair. Yeah. So what do we mean by these? We've already talked about how transaction costs are bad. We want them to be as low as possible. Yeah. And that means making the system as efficient as possible, ultimately, because we also want transaction costs to be fair. Yeah. So some people are providing the infrastructure, the people operating peers, the people providing servers, the people providing networks. They're infrastructure providers, and they should be paid. Yeah, they're providing. It should be a win-win for them as well. Yeah, we're all about win-win value exchange, so it should be a win-win for the providers of infrastructure as well as the users of infrastructure. So the way that we get fairness and low transaction costs is we have to really focus on efficiency. Yeah, make the network as efficient as possible so that we can have minimal transaction costs, but those are still enough to fairly compensate the providers of infrastructure. And that's kind of the balance that we have to get right. But as long as prices are minimal and as long as they're fair, we're kind of achieving that. We can't make transaction costs exactly zero, because then you're getting a free ride. Yeah, someone else, you're taking value from infrastructure providers without giving anything back. Yeah, so zero is not fair. Yeah. If you're using resources that other people are providing, or if you're using scarce resources and you're denying other people access to those resources, then a price of zero would be wrong. Yeah, so that's why it should not be zero, but it should be very, very low. We want it to be as low as possible, while still being fair for the people delivering it. So we talk a bit about the mechanisms we use for transaction cost calculation in the thing. There are obviously transaction costs for stuff that affects the global state. So global state transactions do have some transaction costs. The data lattice is 100% free. Yeah, so there's no transaction costs on the data lattice, but you bring your own infrastructure. Yeah, so you bring your own servers, your own storage, your own network. Yeah, and if you want to then pay other people to provide additional infrastructure, then like backup services or something, then you can. But the protocol and the operation of that protocol is 100% free.
Awesome.
Digital assets. So we do want to make it possible for people to build any kind of digital assets. And it's about empowering users really to, build digital assets that complement real world assets. I think one of the most important points here, I won't labour this point, is but assets can be either on-chain assets, so this might be stuff like NFTs or digital currencies, fungible tokens, security tokens. These kind of things will be on-chain digital assets typically. Or you can also have data assets that are off-chain. And this might be data. This might be pure data, like some data set you've compiled, or your health records, or code is data. So an AI model is in fact also data. It's just a bunch of tensors and a way of executing those tensors. So we want to enable all these different kinds of assets, whether they're on-chain or off-chain, and make sure that can work together in a smooth way. And it's got to be open, so people can innovate and build these as they wish. Which actually leads nicely onto this point, open architecture. It is meant to be an open architecture. We are building in the spirit of the original internet, where the network provides this reliable infrastructure that everyone can depend upon, but it's up to the users, the people in the ecosystem, people building apps, people building whatever kind of tools or data assets they want, to decide how to use that. Yeah, the internet did not design Google, and say search must be built this way. Google designed their search engine to work with the internet. Yeah, and it's going to be the same for Convex. If you think of Convex as like a new layer of the internet, that's probably the best way to think about it. And then people can build apps, services, assets on top of that. And that's how it should be. It should be an open architecture that's designed from the ground up to facilitate those kind of innovations. And of course, consistent with that, we want to be open source. So everything on Convex is on GitHub, so you're welcome to see the code hot off the press, and anyone's welcome to contribute, add their own suggestions or improvements. So open source philosophy throughout. Network neutrality is again in line with the principles of the original internet. Everyone. And it's also in line with this principle of fair access and self-sovereignty. The network should be neutral. The network doesn't have a stance over, discriminating against particular users or applications. Yeah, if you don't want to use it for a certain thing, then don't use it for that thing. The network is neutral. It's also neutral with respect to freedom to participate in operations. So anyone can operate a peer on the Convex network as long as you follow the protocol rules. Free to operate a peer, and if you don't follow the protocol rules, then other peers just ignore you, because you get booted out effectively. So it's designed to be a true decentralized network in that sense, where everyone can become a peer operator on a level playing field with other peer operators. We do talk a little bit about the Convex coin, and this is because we do need a native currency on the network to control use of scarce resources, like, for example, access to the transactions on the global state. So this is how we make sure that we charge minimal but fair transaction fees for network level transactions. So we talk a little bit about the Convex coin. I won't go into the tokenomics, obviously, but it's part of the manifesto. And I think very importantly, look, the way that we issue coins is to people who contribute to the ecosystem. Yeah, and this is all coins. Yeah, there's no secret treasury of coins that's Mike's hidden balance. Yeah. All coins will be issued over time to people or institutions that contribute to the ecosystem. And there's two ways of doing that: either people who contribute to the community, to the open source, contributors of time, effort, and skills, or people who contribute resources, so money which then gets spent on the ecosystem through coin purchases. So those are the two ways that coins get distributed, and that's 100% of coins get distributed by that over time as the ecosystem continues to grow. And then finally, very important to finish on governance. We want to make sure that this is really governed for the long term as a public utility network. Yeah, this is something which is available to everyone to create value, to deliver on all the goals we've talked about elsewhere in the manifesto, and we want to make sure that we have good governance that enables that. So initially, the Convex Foundation is taking control is acting as a governance point, but in the longer term, certainly we want this to become more of decentralized governance. Yeah, so participants in the ecosystem can have a sort of democratic say in how the governance system and the network evolves, and that'll be as we grow and as we develop the capabilities to support decentralized government. We'll slowly institute decentralized governance as far as possible, and hopefully one day it's a well-governed global institution. And that's what the Convex Foundation should be aiming to sort of facilitate that in the long run.
Yeah, and that discussion there really talks about how you plan to do that, Mike. This was really, really interesting in terms of the good governance. Also, I think you mentioned that anybody can contribute even to this manifesto with a GitHub pull, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if anyone sees a way to improve the manifesto or has got an idea, two ways to do it very quickly. First of all, join the Convex Discord, and we talk about these kind of things, ideas on the Convex Discord all the time. But if you want to discuss an idea, the Discord is the place to come and join and chat. Or alternatively, again, this is all open source. It's all on GitHub. You can see the GitHub page here, so it's in the Convex Dev organization, design papers and manifesto. But if you want to do a pull request, you can do some edits, and you can create a pull request sort of using the sort of standard GitHub tools, and that'll all get considered as pull requests come in, and maybe discussed on the Discord or over email or stuff. But any positive improvements to the manifesto are very welcome. So feel free to get involved, and as always, good contributions become eligible for coin awards as well. So that's a good win-win opportunity there. So we've run a little bit over, but I hope everyone's found that interesting and useful, and
it was awesome.
Yeah. And as always, happy to continue the discussion on the Discord. So do join us there if you want to chat about any of these topics. So better sign off, but thanks all for joining, and hopefully see you all next week. Bye for now.
Okay. Thanks.